My dad called me on a Tuesday morning in October, and the first thing he said was, "I need you to listen to me carefully, because I'm only going to say this once." I was in my car in the parking lot of a Home Depot in Raleigh, North Carolina. I had a list on my phone of stuff I needed for a bathroom renovation I'd been putting off for 3 months. The coffee in my cup holder was still hot. Normal Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday where the biggest decision you make is whether to get the matte or satin finish on your grout sealer. And then my dad said that, in that voice, and I put the coffee down and I didn't touch it again. His name is Frank. He's 71 years old, retired structural engineer, worked for the same firm in Columbus, Ohio for 32 years. The kind of guy who did the family taxes by hand every year until I was in college because he didn't trust software to catch everything. The kind of guy who has a filing cabinet in his home office with a folder for every single year going back to 1987, each one labeled in the same neat block letters, each one exactly where it's supposed to be. He was never the type to call just to talk. He called when there was something to say, said it, and got off the phone. That was Frank. Always had been. So when he said, "I need you to listen carefully," I listened. He said, "Your sister has been telling people I have dementia." I didn't say anything for a second. "She told the Hendersons next door," he said. "She told your Aunt Carol. She told my doctor, some guy I don't even know. She found him somewhere, and she's been talking to a lawyer about something called a guardianship petition." I looked it up. I know what it means. I said, "Dad, I know what year it is," he said. "I know who the president is. I know your mother's birthday and your birthday and the name of every bridge I ever worked on." I finished the Thursday crossword in under 40 minutes last week. I do not have dementia. And I believed him, immediately. Not because I wanted to, not because he was my dad and it was easier to believe him. I believed him because of the way he said it. Flat. Precise. The way he'd always stated facts his whole life, without dressing them up. But here's the thing I need to be honest about. There was a second, maybe 2 seconds, where another part of my brain went, okay, but he's 71. He's been alone for 2 years. He's been through a lot. And Diane has been there every week, seeing things I haven't seen from 400 miles away. People don't always know. I'd heard that. Read it somewhere. That sometimes the people closest to them are the last ones to see it. I hated that I thought that. But I thought it. I said, "How long has this been going on?" He said 4 months, maybe 5. It started small. She'd correct me in front of people, tell them I'd forgotten something I hadn't forgotten, and I'd say I didn't forget that, and she'd give people a look. He paused. "You know the look," he said. I knew the look. My sister's name is Diane. She's 44, 3 years older than me, lives about 20 minutes from my dad in Westerville. And I've spent a lot of time since all of this trying to figure out exactly when things shifted with her. Because she wasn't always like this. Growing up, she was just a normal older sister. Bossy in the way older sisters are. A little competitive, but nothing that ever felt off. Even into adulthood, we had a normal relationship. She stayed in Ohio after college. Stayed close to home. Stayed close to our parents. I moved to Raleigh for a job 12 years ago and built my life there. After Mom died 2 years ago, Diane was over at Dad's constantly. Helping with groceries, driving him to appointments, sitting with him on evenings when the house got too quiet. I flew up when I could, but it was never as often as I should have, and I knew that, and I carried some guilt about it. I thanked Diane for being there. She said, of course, that's what family does. I didn't ask what she thought family owed her in return. I drove up to Columbus that Saturday. Didn't tell Diane I was coming. Told Dad to just act normal. Regular visit, don't mention the call. The drive up I-77 takes about 5.5 hours from Raleigh, depending on traffic around Charlotte. I've done it probably 30 times in 12 years, enough that I could tell you exactly where the good rest stops are and which stretches get slow on a Friday afternoon. But this time it felt different. I kept turning it over in my head, playing out both versions. In one version, I get there, and something is genuinely wrong, and Diane has been right, and I've been too far away to see it, and now I have to figure out what that means. In the other version, I get there and Dad is fine, and something else is going on entirely. I didn't let myself land on either one, I just drove. I pulled up to the house around noon. The maple tree in the front yard had turned orange and deep red, the kind of color that only happens for about 2 weeks in October, before everything goes brown. Dad was on the porch with a coffee and a book. He stood when he saw my truck, and we shook hands at the bottom of the porch steps the way we always do. Firm, 2 pumps, because my dad is not a hugger and never has been, and I gave up trying to change that somewhere around age 15. He said, "There's leftover chili in the fridge." We went inside and I noticed things. I always notice things when I come back to that house now. Since Mom, her reading glasses were gone from the side table in the living room, finally. but her blue cardigan was still on the hook by the back door, the one she wore in the garden. I don't think my dad could bring himself to move it. The kitchen looked a little different than it used to, more bare on the counters. She had always kept stuff out, olive oil and the ceramic jar with the wooden spoons and a little bowl of fruit that was more decoration than function. Now the counters were clear. The magnets on the fridge were the same ones that had been there since I was a kid, but there were fewer of them. Like the house was slowly getting simpler, quieter. We ate the chili at the kitchen table and we talked for 2 solid hours, and I paid attention to every word. He talked about a pedestrian bridge project he'd been following in some engineering journal, walked me through the design problem they were solving, got genuinely animated about it. He asked about the renovation in detail, wanted to know what kind of subfloor I was working with, told me a story about a house he and Mom had looked at in 1981 that had the worst tile work he'd ever seen in his life. He asked about my friend Marcus, remembered exactly what had been going on with him the last time I'd mentioned it, which was maybe 9 months ago. He told a joke. He laughed at his own joke the way he always does, this short, quiet laugh through his nose. There was nothing wrong with my dad. I tested him once. I'm not proud of it, but I did it. I dropped a wrong date into something I was saying, waited. He caught it inside 5 seconds, just said no, that was the following year, and kept going. Didn't make a thing of it. Diane got there at 3. She came through the front door with a bag from that bakery he likes on Schrock Road, the one that does the apple fritters he's had a thing for since forever. She kissed him on the cheek, and then she saw me at the table and something moved across her face. It was fast. If I hadn't been watching for it, I would have missed it. Not just surprise, something tighter than surprise. Something that needed a second to smooth itself back out. She said, "Hey, I didn't know you were coming up." I said I'd been meaning to for a while. Just finally made it happen. She sat down and we talked, and for the first 10 minutes, it was completely normal. She asked about Raleigh. I asked about her job. Dad told her about the bridge project he'd been telling me about earlier, and she nodded along. And then it started. He was in the middle of a sentence, something about the engineering firm he'd followed for years, and he used the word cantilever, which is a word he has used approximately 10,000 times in his life. He said it, and then he paused, half a second. The kind of pause anyone might take when they're deciding what word comes next. Nothing. Normal. Diane said, "Cantilever, right, Dad? That's the word." Like she was helping. He looked at her. Then he said, "Yes, cantilever," and something shifted in his posture. Just slightly. His shoulders came in a little. He continued the sentence, but it was different now, shorter, like he was choosing simpler words. She did it again 20 minutes later. He was telling a story. A long one about a project that had gone sideways in the 90s, a story I'd heard before and knew perfectly well. And he paused in the middle of it to think about a detail, and she said, "You don't have to remember all of it, Dad. The point is the same." He said, "I remember it." She smiled. Patient. Kind. "Of course you do." He didn't finish the story. I sat there and watched it happen, and I felt something cold settle in my chest because I understood what I was looking at now. This wasn't frustration or impatience on her part. It was practiced. The interruptions came at exactly the right moments. Not when he was actually confused, but when he was about to prove he wasn't. She was editing him. In real time. In front of me. After dinner, I stepped outside and texted him from the driveway. I said, "You doing okay in there?" He replied in 11 seconds, "I hate this." I stood there in the cold for a minute looking at those 2 words. Then I went back inside and helped with dishes and made small talk and left around 9. Drove to the Fairfield Inn on Easton and lay on the bed in the dark for a long time. I called Diane in the morning before I drove back, asked if she wanted to get coffee. She suggested a place near her house and I said sure. We sat across from each other and she wrapped both hands around her mug, the way she does when she's settling in for a conversation, and she asked how I thought Dad was doing. I said I thought he seemed pretty good. She nodded slowly. The patient nod. "You were only here for a day, Kyle." I said I know. She said, "I'm there every week. I see things you don't see." He repeats himself. He loses track of what day it is. Last month he called me by Mom's name twice in the same afternoon. She stopped. Let that land. "I'm not trying to make this into something it's not. I'm just trying to deal with what's actually happening." And she said it in a way that was tired and real. Not rehearsed. She looked like someone who had been carrying something for a long time and was relieved to finally put part of it down. And, I want to be honest, for a second I wobbled, because that's a specific detail. Calling her by Mom's name. That's not something you make up. And she had been there every week and I hadn't been, and maybe I'd spent one Saturday seeing what I wanted to see. And she'd been watching something real happen and I was about to make it worse. Then I thought about 11 seconds. I said, I think we should get him evaluated. Independently. A specialist? Nobody either of us knows. She said that was probably a good idea. She said it too fast. Like it was the right answer, and she already knew it wasn't going to find anything, and it didn't matter. I drove back to Raleigh and I made calls all week. Found a neuropsychology practice in Columbus with good reviews. No connection to our family. Got Dad an appointment. He drove himself there and back. He told me afterward that the doctor, a woman named Dr. Reeves, had spent almost 2 hours with him. Memory tests, language, spatial reasoning, problem solving. She'd asked him to walk her through the logic of a specific bridge design, just to see how he thought under pressure. He said he'd liked her. Said it was the first time in months someone had sat across from him and just listened to him think. The results came back clean. No impairment, no indicators of anything. Above average across almost every category for his age group. Dr. Reeves had written in her notes that his cognitive profile was inconsistent with the concerns that had apparently been raised by family members, and that the behaviors described were more consistent with situational anxiety in a social context than with any neurological condition. She was saying, in clinical language, that someone had gotten inside his head. I called Diane and read her the summary. She was quiet. Then she said, "One evaluation isn't necessarily definitive. These things develop gradually. Maybe we should get a second opinion." Not relief, not even a little, just a pivot to the next objection. I said, "Diane, who's the doctor you've been using?" She said, "Dr. Pellegrino. He's known Dad for years." I said, "He's a GP." She said, "He knows him? That matters." I said, "What exactly has he been documenting? Things he's observed himself, or things you've been telling him?" Silence. She said I was being hostile. Said she'd been dealing with this alone for months while I lived my life 400 miles away, and now I was going to swoop in for one weekend and act like I had it all figured out. I said I appreciated everything she'd done and I'd be in touch. I called a lawyer, Tom Garrett, elder law attorney in Columbus. A friend had used him a couple of years back. I called, laid out the whole thing start to finish. He listened, asked 2 questions. Did I have the evaluation in writing? Did Dad want to fight this? I said yes to both. He said the letter would go out within the week. I don't know what happened on Diane's end when it arrived. What I know is that she called Dad about 4 days later. The conversation was 6 minutes long. He called me right after. He said she'd apologized, said she'd just been worried and it had maybe gone further than it should have. She'd cried a little. I asked what he'd said back. He said he told her he appreciated the call and would be in touch. Then he said, "I want to update my will." I said, "Okay." He said, "I've been meaning to since your mother passed. This is just the thing that made me stop putting it off." He said it the way he'd say he needed to clean out the gutters. Practical. A thing that needed doing. I said, "You don't have to do this because of her." He said, "I know I don't have to. I want to." There's a difference. He went to Tom Garrett's office that Thursday. Handled everything himself. Didn't ask me to come. Didn't need me to come. I think that was important to him. Going alone. Proving it to himself as much as anyone. Thanksgiving was weird. I drove up for it. Diane came. We sat around the same table we'd sat around our whole lives and made the same food and talked about safe things. She was quieter than usual. Dad was fine. Better than fine, actually. He told a long story about a Thanksgiving in 1987 when the furnace broke and my mom made everyone eat in their winter coats, and by the end of it he had the whole table laughing. Diane laughed too. I watched her laugh and I thought about what that meant. Whether she felt anything about what she'd done. Whether she'd found a version of events in her head where she was still the good guy. People are good at that. I've done it myself in smaller ways, constructed a story where my choices make sense, where my motives were cleaner than they actually were. I don't know what story she tells herself. What I know is that after Thanksgiving, she stopped coming over every week. She still came, just less. And Dad, in the months after all of it, started doing something I noticed slowly. He stopped second-guessing himself out loud. He stopped apologizing for pauses mid-sentence. He stopped checking my face after he said something to see if it landed right. He just talked again. The way he used to. He called me in February to tell me he'd beaten his best time on the Thursday crossword. Wanted me to know. I told him it was impressive, and he said of course it is, which is about as close to bragging as Frank gets. He asked about the renovation. I told him it was done finally, and he asked about the tile, and I said I'd done it myself, and he was quiet for a second, and then he said, "Send me a picture, I want to see the grout lines." I sent it. He texted back about 4 minutes later. "Not bad, I would have gone with a smaller offset, but it works. Highest compliment available from a structural engineer on home improvement, I'll take it." I've thought a lot about that phone call. The one in the Home Depot parking lot. The way he opened with "I need you to listen to me carefully." He knew I might not believe him right away. He'd probably been thinking about making that call for weeks, maybe longer, trying to figure out who to call and whether anyone would actually hear him. He picked me. I almost let him down. I want to say that clearly because I think it matters. I had 30 seconds in that parking lot where I told myself, maybe Diane has a point. Maybe I'm too far away to really know. Maybe this is just what it looks like from a distance when someone gets older. 30 seconds of exactly what she was counting on. The reasonable doubt she'd been carefully building for months. I'm glad I went up that Saturday. I'm glad I sat at that kitchen table and ate that chili and asked those questions. I'm glad I watched what happened when she walked through the door and I saw it for what it was. And I'm glad he called me first. He's fine. More than fine. He's doing 2 crosswords a day now because Dr. Reeves told him cognitive engagement was important. And my dad, when a doctor tells him something, takes it seriously and then does 20% more than recommended because that's just how he's built. He still has the blue cardigan on the hook by the back door. I noticed it last time I was up. Didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. Some things you just leave where they are. So guys, I'm glad you've listened to this far, and if you enjoyed this story, please support the channel with a like and subscribe. Also, check out my other interesting stories in the upcoming videos. See you later!